I just wondered if you might comment a little bit about how place, a sense of place, comes to be in your work. Seeing you now, what little I know about you, you don't have much to do with New Jersey. And you don't seem like you have much to do with Great Falls. But how does it work in the development?
Well, I mean, there is a part of it that I can't explain, and thank God, because if I did or tried to, I would just bore your ears off. But there isn't any doubt that certain kinds of landscapes are, for me, what Dick Hugo called a triggering town. And Catherine Ann Porter said something too. In Neruda, if you read around among what writers say, they're always talking about things like this. What is the rising of a piece of literature? Neruda said that when he wanted to write a poem, he felt what he called a kicking in his soul. And Catherine Ann Porter said that she felt a commotion inside of herself. There's no doubt that when I first went to Saskatchewan, that I felt a commotion, and I just thought to myself, goodness gracious, I have to set something here. I don't know what it'll be. And the same was true in New Jersey. I thought, my goodness, there's just something here that calls me to give language to some unphrased at that time set of sensations. That said, I'm not one of those people who believes that landscape is generative. For me, people do what they do in front of landscape, and that landscape doesn't cause them particularly to be the way they are or to think the way they think. That's a kind of a connection that readers will make, but that I myself do not make. So that landscape is, for me, principally language, which I try to dedicate to those unphrased sensations, so that I can create a plausible background for the things that I want the characters to do in the foreground. And so it's never a matter of the hills being alive with the sound of music. I'm doggedly anti-romantic about these things. I mean, I think that I couldn't set Canada in France, but I could set a lot of the stories in Rock Springs in Kansas. The only reason I couldn't set Canada in France is that I only wanted to call it Canada. And so that kind of limited what I could say. But in lots of ways, I think a lot of stories that I've written in my life, I could have set somewhere else. And it would have been more or less the same story, because the point was not that the place caused the action. The place was just the background against which the action occurred. And that may violate some of your sensibilities for me to say that. And that's all right. I mean, it's all right for me and it's all right for you, because you have different feelings about those things than from the ones that I have. But I'll say one more thing. The reason I feel that way about landscape being not the generative quality that makes people be the way that they are is that I was born in Jackson, Mississippi. And I grew up thinking, being told all my life that Mississippi was a great place. That Mississippi was a place one should be proud to be from and should adopt its ways. Well, no. So I've done everything I could to demystify landscape for me, so as to make me in control of what happens, rather than have it be in control of what happens. Yes, ma'am.
As somebody who went to 8 schools before college and moved to Canada at the age of 15, I wanted to thank you for the first part of that you just read.
I knew I'd find you somewhere. You've been calling out to me.
I'm really looking forward to reading the book.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you, have you read, or do you have any favorite Canadian authors? Or Canadian
just the ones you know about. Really, really and truly, Mavis Gallant and Alice and
Margaret Lawrence, Margaret Atwood.
Well, Margaret Atwood, not one of my favorite writers, but I respect her work a lot. I like some of the maritime writers.
I would think that Stone Angel comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you.
But Guy Van de Hege out in Saskatchewan, Dave Carpenter out in Saskatchewan. Rudy Wiebe in Alberta. A lot of Canadian writers have made a lot of difference to me. Although I don't think of them as Canadian writers, I just think of them as writers. So I have to scratch my head to remember which one's a Canadian, which one's not.
The one I was always told when I lived there that if you tell two people that you can't tell which one is the American and which one is the Canadian, the one that screams is the Canadian. In other words, they don't want to be taken as an American.
I'll tell you what, well, think about that. They always used to say, if you go fishing with a Canadian, how do you keep him from stealing your sandwich? Take another Canadian. Yes, sir.
I think I had read somewhere that you had written at least one screenplay.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if it ever had been made into a movie, if you could talk a bit about that process and how that was.
Well, I wrote a movie called Bright Angel that was produced by 1989. Had Sam Shepard in it, and Dermot Mulroney and Lily Taylor, and a wonderful bunch of actors. My screenplay wasn't any good. And the director wasn't any good. It was his first real opportunity, and he's never done another picture. So I kind of went back to what I thought I was good at. But when I wrote the first novel I ever wrote, which was called A Piece of My Heart, Paramount bought it, and I went out to L.A. and basically moved into the Paramount lot and stayed at the Paramount lot for 2 years, working with a wonderful man named Richard Silbert, who was the head of production at the time and was a great production designer. He was the first below-the-line guy who ever was a studio head. And he was an aesthete and a snob and a wonderful, wonderful, funny guy. And he taught me a lot about writing screenplays. I had Raymond Chandler's office, and I would come down every afternoon and show him my pages that I had written during the day, that he would vet what I did. But it just didn't take, you know. I just wasn't very good at it. I wanted to write literary dialogue. I wanted to write dialogue that didn't, so to say, play. I wanted to write dialogue that got read silently on the page, or that I could read in the way I wanted to read. But when I saw the movie, I heard the lines people said, and I thought, oh God, this is so stiff and so expository and so blah blah blah. You know, screenplays were really art forms. Joan Didion says that they're not writing at all. That's what Joan Didion said. They're just writing blueprints for what the actors do. And while that sounds derogatory, it isn't, because it really is what it is, and it doesn't mean that they can't be good. It doesn't mean that they can't be wonderful and useful, but fundamentally their relationship to whoever's observing them, the spectator versus the reader, has a wholly different relationship. And I didn't like that relationship. I didn't like collaboration. I collaborate with my wife. That's my one collaborator. So I just wasn't cut out to do it. I wanted the money.